Hola, buenos días, bienvenidas y bienvenidos a la AECID. Today we have a special guest. We have with us Tom Fletcher, Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Action and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and we will be having a conversation with Director Anton Leys, after which there will be a turn for questions that will last around 15 minutes, and then we will have a close-out of the session. But before starting, we wanted to show a short video of Spanish humanitarian action for us to watch.
Bueno, buenos días, bon dia. Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to have Tom with us. We feel the room is a bit quiet. I promised to him that you are not that quiet, that I know you well, and there will be many questions, and this is going to be a lively discussion. We are very happy to have Tom with us because he's leading very important work at the moment. I do not need to tell all the humanitarians in the room where we stand. But I wanted to convey to Tom the message that the sun you see in Spain is shining. We want you to leave Spain full of energy. There are a few things that we can offer to the world. We are not the largest donor at the moment, but we are one that is growing, that we are one that is really committed, and we are one that is a strong team you will have here with us. I mean, we are Spain's Humanitarian and Development Agency, but we work with agencies and colleagues from the regions that are important in our system, and there is a strong, closely knit network of civil society that are our partners, and they do very important work on the field, but are also crucial in maintaining the support of Spanish people for this super important public policy that we like to say is not just a matter of solidarity, but also responsibility in the state of affairs of the world today. So, you know, as Tom, we're coming from a big reform. We adopted a new law committing to 0.7. We're making slow inroads. We would like to go faster, but as part of that, 10%, we have this target of devoting 10% of the 0.7 to humanitarian action. And if I had to define our approach, I would say one is principled. You may have seen our PM in social media and other places, like standing up for values, including IHL. That doesn't make us very popular in some quarters, and in some cases we feel, if not alone, we feel being the first, but we don't mind leading the charge on this. So we are principled. We are also committed. Over the last 5 years, we doubled our investment, and I underline a lot the word investment in humanitarian action globally. We invest now around 224 million a year. Again, we are not the biggest, but the trajectory, I think, is also important. At AECID, we tripled over the same amount of time, and we are trying to be better, also more flexible. About 30% of what we invest now through the UN system and other partners is fully flexible. We want to be better donors too. And even in the current situation of a rollover budget, last year we increased by 20%. Money is not the most important, but money matters too, and it allows us to walk the talk. So principle, committed, and I think we're innovative as well. We are an agency that has humanitarian, development, and on the peace we have many diplomats in the room, but we work with our ministry, and we are really part of these efforts also to reduce humanitarian needs, promoting peace. We emphasize protection, gender-based violence. The gender element is important. You will be participating later today in the 5th Ministerial Conference on Feminist Foreign Policy. We thank you also for that. And on things like localization that you are preaching now as part of the reset, we try to be good citizens. We are not at the 25% grand bargain target, but we are a bit over 12%, which is, that puts us, I think, relatively well compared to others. Anyway, enough on my side. We want to hear you. Colleagues here have been waiting for this visit. And I wanted to start off by asking you how you see the world at the moment. We have a big crisis of values, a big crisis of funding, humanitarian needs, on the other hand, exploding, greater resource to the use of the force, 130 conflicts, as we saw, the questioning of IHL. What do you think are the main features? I mean, you are being tasked with the humanitarian reset to fix this all. I don't know how you go about this, but what are the main features you think that are defining, let's say, the pressures that the humanitarian system is undergoing at the moment?
Well, thank you so much, Antti, and thank you everyone for being here this morning, and thank you most importantly for what you're doing at the moment. This is, as you described, a really grim, hard time to be doing this work and to be holding the flame, actually, for this mission that we believe in as a collective and which is under such sustained attack at the moment. I do feel, as dark as it is right now, and we can talk a little bit about the pressures that we're under, that the tide is turning for the international system, for multilateralism. I think we're seeing what happens when you lose that scaffolding. Yeah. And there have been alternative models experimented with over the last few years in the humanitarian space and in the international multilateral space. And I think people are seeing the limits of those models. And so my hope is that long after some of us have hung up our gilets and are recovering from this time, that we'll look back 2035, 2040, wherever it is, and say we came through this period when it wasn't just an attack on our funding, but an attack on our morale and our legitimacy and our self-confidence as multilateralists. And I think at that moment, there will be a reckoning of who stood most robustly through this period for this work and for these values. And Spain will be in the Premier League of the countries that really did come through this period at a time when a lot of governments took the easy choice. And at the moment, it's the easy political choice. There aren't people out there protesting in the streets about the cuts in my own country of the UK. There aren't people in any number protesting about the destruction of USAID or about cuts elsewhere across our traditional donors. We are struggling to make that connection with the public. And so, yes, the easy choice for a finance minister is to just slash that budget. But you haven't taken the easy choice. And really importantly, you haven't taken the easy choice to go quiet when it's easy to go quiet on so many of the issues where we're really testing the principled approach and IHL in particular, international humanitarian law. You've been there from the very top, and that signal has been very, very strong. And as colleagues here will know, because we're all working with friends and partners and colleagues in the field, that's heard in the field, in the places where our colleagues are risking their lives right now. I've just been messaging on the way here with our humanitarian coordinator in Kyiv, a massive night of attacks last night. I was talking yesterday to our humanitarian coordinator in Beirut, where they're braced for a further round of strikes in Beirut, in the southern suburbs and beyond. We know the situation in Gaza. I was talking yesterday to Dr. Tedros, just out of Bunia, and we know what the situation is in the Kivus and up around the cross-border areas with the rapid spread of Ebola faster than we can contain it. So our colleagues are out there responding with incredible courage to what feels like a set of insurmountable problems, insurmountable challenges. And they hear it very clearly when leaders in Madrid and elsewhere stand up for their work and stand up for our sense of confidence in this mission at a time when a lot of people are looking to see the collective here, and it really is a collective family across the NGOs, the partners in the field, the UN agencies. A lot of people are wanting to see that fall apart. And a lot of people predicted that in a time of massive funding cuts, it would fall apart. But we're doing something different. We're holding together. And it's tough. The discussions are difficult, and we can all argue about country pooled funds or prioritization or the nexus or different aspects of it. And we should argue about it because these issues matter. But on the fundamentals, however tough it is for us, we are actually holding together as a community right now. And actually that does give me confidence and optimism. Just one final thought, I promise. I think we're doing well at the moment on the reform part of the humanitarian reset. On the regrouping, which I'm afraid is another way of saying we're just getting smaller. But we don't want to describe it as a retreat from what we're doing, but just as a consolidation around a lot of the organizations in this space. Where we need more space and energy now in the second half of the year and beyond is on how we reimagine this sector for the future, how we reconnect with the public, how we really take advantage of technological change in order to confront some of the challenges of technological change for our sector, and how we ensure that humanitarian work is future-proofed for an age of AI, climate change, and I fear ongoing conflict.
Yeah, well, indeed, we are a bit proud of saying the same thing in Ukraine, in Gaza, in the Sahel. That's part of our foreign policy, not just our humanitarian work. A lot of the discussion is, of course, on, as you said, the shrinking of budgets, and we may have a humanitarian system that is smaller, but we are all under the pressure, and I'm sure you heard this from some of our colleagues that are cutting their budgets, the pressure of doing more with less. And that reminds me, lessons in chemistry, saying, matter is not created or destroyed. It only transforms. So it's very difficult. It's against the laws of chemistry, actually, to do more with less. Completely. I think we can do better with what we have, and that, I think, is what you are trying to do with the reset. Maybe a smaller system, but can we make it more effective? What are your reflections? I think the reset has been going on for a while. What are the areas where you think you have achieved progress? What is still remaining? How can we, all of us, help you in this process that is crucial? Yeah?
And I think that's the $1 million or the $50 billion question that we're all facing. And I'm very conscious of being effectively a coordinator of, if this in business terms, of a group of companies that was probably worth about 50 billion a year a couple of years ago. And then in my time, 18 months or so, we'll be fortunate if we get to 20 billion this year. And that's not because of lack of resources, as we all know. That's the money we're asking for even the hyper prioritized plan, 23 billion, is half of what Wall Street paid out just now in bonuses. It's less than we spend on toys for our pets globally. It's less than 1% of what the world is spending on defense and arms and security at the moment. It's less than the world spent on the first 3 weeks of the conflict across the Straits of Hormuz, let alone the enormous implications of that reckless war for the global economy and for the countries in which we work. So this is a massive challenge to effectively work out how to do as well as we can with half the resource. So I'll give you a scorecard maybe on the reset so far. I think in terms of the defense of our values and our principles and our norms, I'd give us sort of 7 out of 10. I think we're doing well at standing up in the Security Council and beyond at these key moments, when alternatives like the Gaza humanitarian whatever came along, militarized, securitized ways of doing what we do. I think we've done well at holding the line on those. I think we have not done so well at holding the line on protection of women and girls, and we'll talk about this later, of course, but in a time when there is this global culture war against women, I fear that at a time of cuts, so many of those cuts have fallen on women's organizations, and there's been a chilling effect. That's why I'll be very clear later on that, as I have been with all of our key donors, that we will always prioritize women and girls in crisis response. That hasn't changed, and there is no change to that. I think we've been quite effective at holding the line on some of the unacceptable conditions that donors are trying to put on funding. And it's difficult to navigate that territory, but so far I'm confident that we'll look back and show that we held that line. I think in terms of defending our values, while we articulate it collectively, we're not doing so well on protecting our humanitarian colleagues. 1,000 dead colleagues in 3 years is an outrage. And the lack of investigations, the lack of accountability is utterly shocking. And countries like Spain, Australia, Ireland, Switzerland are really outspoken, and thank you for that. But we're struggling to translate that into genuine protection for our colleagues. So that's the defend bit. I'm giving us maybe 6 or 7 out of 10 as a collective. Then on defining how we work, we were forced to really, really hyper-prioritize beyond what any of us would want to do. And the brutal choices we've had to take are actually very tough for us, I think, as a collective family. We know the needs are far, far greater than we're currently able to fundraise in that first phase for. But I think the principal thing to do is to say that if we're only able to raise 20 billion, I've said 23 billion, we have to start with severity 4 and 5. And we have to, as a family, make sure that we're focused on that first. Of course, we want to raise the money for everything else, but that's where, if we're choosing between someone who is starving and a project in a conference in a rich capital, I will always choose the food for the starving person, or the medicine, or the water, or the sanitation, or the protection, or the education of that person. One area where I think we've done well on this hyperprioritization is the overall proportion of what we're getting from donors that's going to hyperprioritize work is increasing. Okay. So we're seeing with almost every key donor, the Americans are up at, the money is less from the Americans, but they're 92%. The EU has held the overall number, but they've increased from sort of 60 to over 70% hyperprioritized. So we're seeing the sector come together around what it's always asked us to do. And we've been in many donor meetings where you've all said to us, be clear about the priorities. And we've done that. And we're seeing member states respond. But I don't underestimate how difficult, the challenges of that and the risk that it means that, we were talking earlier about some of the resilience nexus type work that can suffer as a result of that, of us being forced to prioritize in that way. So I'm going to give us 6 out of 10. The real test for prioritization will be in December when we do it again. Will people really engage? Will the big agencies really come behind that process and feel that they benefit from it as well? It's interesting, we're sharing all the data. It's interesting, you can go online and see who are the main beneficiaries at the moment across the sector of the funding that's coming in. And I hope that will correct some of the apprehension that's out there. On the delivery strand of the reset, I'd maybe give us 6.5 out of 10. We have taken a lot of the unnecessary duplication out of the system, but we've got another big jump to go. There are still too many acronyms in this sector. There are still too many overlapping programs. There are still too many bits of the sector charging too much on the way through between your taxpayers and the mother in Goma who needs that funding. So we've got to go further in taking out more of that unnecessary layering. And I hope that through our accountability work and the tracking, we'll be able to be more honest about where the costs of the sector are, so that you can then challenge us and say it's not good enough that you're taxing us 3 times on the way to Goma. So work in progress. And finally, on what we call the devolve part of the reset, I think here I'm going to give us maybe 4 or 5 out of 10. There are 2 strands to this. I think we have seen stronger humanitarian leadership in country. And we fight appointment by appointment to get the best possible person out to these roles and then to really empower them. And the increase in money going to country funds really empowers our HCs. We're seeing as a result the country teams working more closely together. But we've got to get more local community voices onto those country teams, into the decisions about where money is spent. I'm worried that we've actually fallen this year from over 50% of our country funds going to local organizations to around about 20 at this stage of the year. Now, we'll get that up in the second half of the year. A lot of it is about the pace at which we needed to spend the US money coming through. But we've got to really watch carefully to make sure that, look, they're my targets. The sector isn't with me yet. I have to be honest on this. I want to go beyond 50. I've said 70 for local organizations. And in many meetings I'm in, everyone says, excellent, we need to empower local organizations, but let's maybe do it at 10% to start with and build capacity for another 50 years. There are big risks. And we've got to challenge ourselves to go further on that. But what I will say is that there are lots of good examples, NRC recently, Save the Children recently, several UNHCR, of big power players in the sector voluntarily vacating space and saying this is space now for local organizations, not for us. And ultimately, I can't tell people to do that. I don't have the kind of levers to pull. But I think that power of example is very, very important. And then the more we get the local organizations in the room challenging us, the faster we'll move to a sector which really does become local by default, international only where necessary.
I want to pick on this because I think, we are big defenders of localization. As I said, we're still not with grand bargain targets, but we are inching towards that, close to 13%. And it's not just a matter of efficiency, it's also, there is a general reflection on development aid or development cooperation and humanitarian, people feeling more masters of their own destiny. No one, no refugee, no one that we have seen on the field, in field visits, wants to be dependent on aid. And I think, to be honest with you, when we heard at the beginning that line on the reset, this is about life-saving, we are a bit anxious. There are many things that are maybe not immediately life-saving. Yeah. We've seen, you've been emphasizing protection, you've been emphasizing gender-based violence. And this question of localization is how can we support that political consensus? Of course, it means taking more risks. I was in Rome with Kauskau discussing WFP, and they say, well, we want to do localization, but at the same time, if you are in Sudan, there is the matter of access and security. Local organizations are less immune to attacks on humanitarian workers than when you are wearing a blue jacket. How can we create that political momentum for local actors? And everyone here, even on the civil society space, there is that reflection that we need to have our counterparts, our partners, on the development field across, but certainly on the humanitarian side, much more empowered and driving the response, because it's more effective, but it's also more in tune, I guess, with, let's say, even our principles, right?
Yeah, and it's a big challenge. And if it was easy, we'd have done it 11 years ago when we said we were going to do it with the grand bargain, and we'd have done it back in 2005. And, we've said we're going to do this for a long time. And so the obstacles are real. And, and I hear all the time from our local partners their frustrations that they are held to a different account than the rest of us. And that they're much more likely to be given short-term funding with huge amounts of oversight and 19 different forms for 19 different UN agencies and so on. And that, yes, we do talk about risk in a different way when it comes to local organizations. Now, of course, they would recognize that there are places where, think of Myanmar, for just one example among many, where, yes, they do face different risks and where they need the international cover to protect them in getting where they need to get and doing what they need to do. But I think there's been still a reluctance to take the jumps that we need to take. For me, as I say, really key to this will be having local organizations at the IASC, for example, the Interagency Standing Committee, and they'll be there in 2 weeks' time for the next IASC meeting, and that's really maybe I think it's 3 weeks actually, and that's really important. I also have an advisory group that meets before the IASCs, where they really, I mean, it's the most challenging meeting I do, where they really have a go at me over the lack of progress. And then we've just got to make sure that the money follows the message. And for me, that's the country pooled funds. We've got allocations in the last year that have been 100% local. South Sudan have done 100%. It is possible. And you know, we're building the plane as we fly it. We're learning as we go. But we don't have the luxury anymore of funding a sector at the size that it is. By the way, one thing we have to be really careful of in all of this, and that this is an area where they really hold me to account, is that we don't say, okay, we've agreed now, local organizations are in charge, but by the way, there is no money, so good luck. Yeah. And I think sometimes they, and I think they have with good reason, they fear that we're now saying, right, okay, over to you, because effectively the money isn't in the sector anymore. So work in progress, and I think there are challenges for donors, for UN agencies, for international NGOs, as we really do make a genuine power shift in the sector.
No, thank you. Thank you for being so bold and ambitious. When we saw the targets, we wondered whether that was realistic, but the push, you needed to shake up the tree. We are doing what we can. I mean, tomorrow we'll be signing the contribution to OCHA. I cannot mention the figures with the minister, but we are increasing. We are going country-based pool funds, the SERF as well, which is, we've seen it now with the Ebola response, how flexible you can be, like, you know, responding to emergencies, frankly, that nobody had on the radar, and God knows what is going to happen.
Yeah, and I should have said, by the way, as well, because it picks up on Carl's very important point. In all of this, there are evidently some things that only a WFP can do. Yeah. You know, WFP is the only organization that can get food in, you know, by air at the scale needed. You know, WHO with brilliant partners like MSF, Médecins du Monde, and others, you know, are the only people that can really scale up the Ebola response. If we just said, local partners, please just do all of this, it wouldn't be fair. And there are things that the INGOs, that only they can do, including holding the UN to account, including holding governments
of course.
To account. A lot of the advocacy and engagement work, a lot of the capacity building, and so on. So there is space for these different constituencies as part of the family. But at a time when the overall space is shrinking, we all have to think about where we get out of the way.
Very true. Look, I want to leave some space for questions from the audience, but Spain is a middle power. You've been traveling to the field, you've been in Syria. We were talking about the trip that you took there, and the links also with, very interested to hear about that, the links with the development side. We are also a development agency. And we are a bit concerned about this void being created. You know, the reset is, of course, about doing the best with the humanitarian funding that we have and having a strong humanitarian system. But that handshake, handover, you know, synergies, those need to be exploited. At the same time, I want to ask you, what can countries like Spain? I mean, we are a middle power. We do not, you know, we do not sit in the Security Council. I'm not sure how relevant that is these days. But what can we do, you know? And of course, we're being vocal on the international arena. We spoke up against the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. We've been saying principles, principles, principles. Is that enough? How can we engage more effectively? How can we support you and the humanitarian community? We've seen this, as I said, as an investment, a matter of responsibility. It's not charity, it's not solidarity, it's not like something that we do to feel good and go to bed at night, but rather a strategic positioning. So if you can ask those two questions on development and
So I fear that when our successors are sat here, in 5 years' time, I don't know how much longer you have. I certainly won't last 5 years, or 10 years' time. I've said that I hope they'll look back at this time and say we held the line, and that the key UN players and the key member states, were strong around the principles of this space at this moment. I suspect they'll look back and say, and criticize us that we didn't protect that transition space more robustly. And I think it's not because we don't recognize it as important. It's just that we are in a situation where this could be chaotic. It could be free fall on the humanitarian part. And look, my job, I'm ultimately the emergency guy.
Yeah.
And I've worked in development most of my life. I've worked in diplomacy most of my life. I know that. I'm trying not to say the word nexus, but I know the nexus from every angle. I love the nexus. But it's hard as the emergency guy when you're basically thinking, where do we spend the 20 billion, to then be thinking, okay, we've also got to do all this development work as well. I just can't do that. And so it's really important that we have the development partners engaged earlier in the process. It's why I went to Syria with Alexander de Croo, the brilliant new head of UNDP, to demonstrate that in action. It's why I'm doing all the work at the moment with Amina Mohammed around what we call the Strategic Platform Initiative. Sorry about the clunky title. But part of that is looking particularly at transition countries. So we're looking at the Ethiopias, the Nigerias, the Ugandas, the Kenyas, Pakistan and others, to make sure that we are doing that handover in the right way. One of the most contested things I have to do is decide when to hat and de-hat our humanitarian coordinators, our resident coordinators. And it's tricky because I don't want to de-hat people too soon. I want to make sure they've got the resilience, sustainability plan ready. But that requires the development actors in earlier. It requires the development actors, one might say, to think about their own reset in all of this, to make sure that they have the credibility and trust of member states. It requires us to be firm about when we're leaving. And Syria is a good test case for this, where we need to deliver the conditions that mean that people can leave the camps, including clearing the mines, and then we need to hand over to the government and development actors. It's a really good test case for this transition. And we need to get the World Bank in much earlier. And I think that's a big focus for me in the next few months, is working out how we get that transition to the World Bank more effective as well. So there's a lot more to be done in that space. But ultimately, as humanitarians, a sign of our success is that we leave, not that we stay.
Thank you. And I think we have 15 minutes for questions. Right. We know there is a big line of people waiting to question. I see the head of Gerard Graells is the director of the Catalan Development Agency, is my Catalan counterpart. He's sitting here on the first row. As I mentioned before, Tom, our regions, our autonomous communities are key actors. They are closer to citizens, and they also have their own programs. And they sit with us on a common group that decides, it's a small amount of money, about 3 million, that we collectively decide where to invest. And there is quite a bit of financing that is going to country-based pool funds. But Gerard, I think you have a question for Tom.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Anton. Thank you very much to AECID also to invite us to that, I think, great conversation. It was really interesting to hear you. And my question is about the gender approach. We as a Catalan agency, like Spanish Cooperación, we are applying gender approach several years ago, but now we are we are focusing on the feminist cooperation. So how has the RESET integrated gender equality, but particularly at the local level, and how is this being translated into action? And a second question is, what gaps will persist?
And it's such an important question, Gerard. Thank you. And we'll talk a bit more about this later today. But I think there's a real connection between the culture war we're seeing in many of our own societies against women at the moment, and the impact on those we serve in the field. And so we're really seeing this epidemic of sexual violence. You know, I was really struck in Haiti by women telling me that they're taking contraception before they get to the checkpoints. The levels of sexual violence I heard about in the DRC, utterly horrifying. But you know, Sudan, Darfur, you know, it's such a part of the toolkit of conflict at the moment, and utterly terrifying. So we have to be really clear that our work on gender-based violence is core life-saving work. I think there was a danger with some of the messaging from some partners recently that somehow that was no longer, you know, people, and it's a translation issue often. And I'm conscious, here I am speaking English in a room of Spanish speakers, so I should apologize for that. But even within the English language, you know, Churchill once described Britain and America as two nations separated by a common language. And we've encountered issues around the word gender. And I've been absolutely clear, including in writing, with our key donors and with the US, for example, who have been a very generous donor already in the last 6 months, that we will always prioritize work with women and girls, because women and girls are on the front line of all the crises that we deal with. So I think winning that argument at the global level is really important when there has been this more sustained attack on that work. And then a large part of it, you know, as I said, I think we should get to 70% of our country-based funding going to women-led NGOs. And that is not just NGOs working on classic sort of women's issues, but on NGOs working on all sorts of other issues, but led by our extraordinary female humanitarian colleagues in the field. And that's a target we should really be focused on over the coming period. It's, you know, we're also conscious at the center of, when we're doing the UN reform, of making sure that whatever structure emerges, whatever mergers take place in the next few weeks and months, that they are making women's voices stronger rather than weaker in the structures. And I suppose that one final thought is that, you know, the next SG, the next Secretary General, will have a huge agenda ahead of her, and that she should have our full support.
Great that you mentioned her, because
yes,
you know, Spain's position is that it indeed should be a she, and that's what we hope. I mean, it's not in our hands. So yes, we have a system that is highly decentralized. We work as a network. And more I see development and humanitarian agencies less as donors, let's say more connectors of partnerships. A key partnership for us is civil society, also under attack in so many countries. In Spain, another of the features of our system is that we have a very strong civil society, very diverse. It represents the whole of Spanish society. And we have a smaller group of that NGO group that has strong capacity to deliver humanitarian projects. So they are implementers of our projects, but they're also true partners. Every time we have an emergency, when we had the last one, we had a meeting on Lebanon. We have all the regions connected to these emergency meetings, but we also have the civil society. We have with us also Sandra Ferrer, that is in the Coordinadora, which is the coordinating group of NGOs. She leads the work on humanitarian action, and I think she has a question, which I'm sure it will be hard, because I'm being asked always hard questions by them, so I hope you are subject to the same standard.
Excellent, yeah.
Not hard. Long, yes, but I don't think it's hard. Thanks a lot, Lucia, Anton, and Mr. Fletcher, for inviting us and for this interesting conversation. As Anton was saying, we represent over 600 organizations working in development, humanitarian action, and also peace and education for global citizenship. We've been with La Coordinadora and its humanitarian action organizations. We've been reflecting during the last months on the humanitarian reset, and we've identified some underlying risks that you have already mentioned, most of them: hyper prioritization, excessive centralization, limited civil society participation, and also, from our perspective, a narrow approach to localization. At the same time, while doing this exercise, we have highlighted the strengths of the Spanish humanitarian action sector, which must remain grounded in solidarity, respect for international law, humanitarian principles, and share international co-responsibility. And we have, throughout the years, and also with the agency, developed a humanitarian model based on long-term partnerships that include an important participation and role of the international NGOs, as well, of course, as a central role of local actors and affected communities. And finally, we have pushed a lot, and my colleague here has, or the person here has already mentioned it, we have put lots of effort and advocacy on a feminist intersectional humanitarian agenda that recognizes the differentiated impact of crisis on women, children, girls and boys, refugees, displaced people, etc. But unfortunately, what we are saying recently, as you mentioned as well, is that this funding from donors is affecting particularly this feminist dimension, and we see examples like the Mexico City policy, which is not new, but it has been reactivated. And we acknowledge the work of OCHA in this regard, and that it has not affected so far humanitarian funding, but we are concerned about the future on this as well. So here goes my question. It's quite long, but I hope it's understandable.
It's been highly negotiated, I'm sure, by the group of NGOs.
Anton knows well how civil society works, so I will try to make it as simple as possible. So how will OCHA ensure that the humanitarian reset protects principled humanitarian action, supports genuinely locally led, gender-responsive, rights-based responses, and avoids becoming a minimal, politically driven approach that shifts risks to local actors without transferring power and resources? This is my first question, and I don't know if Anton lets me ask a second question. Okay, this is shorter and easier. Given the focus on prioritization, how can the humanitarian reset also incorporate objectives that are harder to measure, such as mental health and the protection of vulnerable populations, particularly children? And that's it. Thanks.
Very good.
Well, they're great questions, and I very much agree with the synthesis of where we are. I think, in terms of protecting principled humanitarian action, we both have to talk the talk and walk the talk. And so we've got to keep saying it. And I think 2 years ago, we probably didn't, my predecessors wouldn't have felt the need to say it at the start of every talk, because we were kind of taking it for granted, particularly that our key partners and member states agreed with us. Whereas now I have to start with defend. I have to start by defending those values because they are under such attack. And so we have to keep saying it, but then we have to win the arguments, sort of argument by argument. And, we've had some key moments in the last year and a half when these alternative models have emerged that I would argue are not principled nor humanitarian. And the hardest parts of my job in the last year and a half have been those moments when we've been in those fights. And they're not just fights with one country, by the way, or two countries. I'm having arguments with countries not even that far from, not Spain, but not even that far from here, on this continent, who are putting unacceptable conditions that we should spend their aid money in their capitals, for example. And so, or that we should spend a disproportionate amount on Ukraine, which of course is a massive priority, but I'm not going to take money from Sahel for Ukraine. And so we have to keep winning the arguments and not just do the theory, but do the practice. I think in terms of then the localization piece of this, which we touched on earlier on, I think, so there was one particular challenge that we faced in the first half of the year, where I think we can now course correct. We had an unexpected and significant amount of US money that came into the system on the 29th of December, 2 billion, that we weren't expecting. I wasn't expecting it on the morning of the 29th of December when I was in the middle of we were negotiating all the way through the Christmas break, and it could easily have gone elsewhere or not come to us. And that came, and this is exciting in terms of reform, but it came all into the country funds, the country-based pool funds. It's a huge challenge. I called Kiki, our humanitarian coordinator in South Sudan, who went overnight from a country-based pool fund of 10 million to one of 110, just like that. And so we had to really adapt to this piece of good news, but good news with challenges It didn't come with conditions. We were able to negotiate that it could come through in the right way to our partner organizations. One condition I put on that money from my side was that we would spend it in 6 months. Now, there were good reasons for that. Firstly, I wanted to make sure we'd get more US money, so I wanted to demonstrate
that you could
impact fast. Secondly, the sector was collapsing, and I wanted to get that money as fast as possible to the frontline organizations to keep so many projects alive that would otherwise have collapsed. So we insisted that it had to be on the basis of our plan, the principled, neutral, humanitarian plan that the sector had identified in the GHO. And we have to hold that line with all of our donors who would like to spend money elsewhere. We have to keep saying, no, these are the priorities. And when I say hyper-prioritized, if you're spending money outside that plan, I'm not going to count it. I'm not going to talk about it when I talk about, if you're saying we need to spend this money in this country over here for political reasons, that's a choice everyone makes. But I won't count it as aid money for the hyper-prioritized plan. But the result of that 6-month limit that I put on that spend was that the bigger players in the sector, the big INGOs and the big UN agencies, got a higher proportion of that funding than they would have done if we'd said you have a year, because they were faster movers. And my job now with the 1.8 billion we've just got from the US and with the generous contributions of so many others coming into the country funds is to make sure that that's balanced out in the second half of the year, and that local actors, when we look at it at the end of the year, we can show that we've taken decisions that support the reset and localization and don't run counter to that. So it's a very practical thing that we're working on at the moment. And just to come back to your introduction, please keep kind of helping us to see where we need to course correct as we go along. Because none of these decisions that keep me awake at night are a yes or no decision. They're all kind of 50-50. And so we'll get lots of them wrong. And we just have to we need the sector to help us navigate.
Thanks. That's a problem we are not going to create ever, to send you 2 billion for Christmas. We'll be sending less, but one thing we are trying to do is to disburse earlier in the year. This is
that's so important.
This is so important, but I've been trying to convey the
Yeah.
message to my own team and so on. It's like, disbursing today is better than disbursing next week.
It's so helpful.
Like, we are trying to do that
Yeah.
as much as we can.
And by the way,
not the 29th of December.
As a result of the plan on saving 87 million lives, we actually have a much larger proportion dispersed in the first quarter.
Yeah.
I think it's up about 8 or 9 billion now, which is really helping our teams to be strategic.
Plan.
And it also means that we've reached 16.4 million people with life-saving aid in the first quarter. We can see that happening. So it's really helpful. Of course, the gold standard is still multi-year, unearmarked.
We are trying to do
funding.
more multi-year, more unearmarked too. We have another question from MSF. I believe Carmen is here. I cannot see her. Yeah, okay. There needs to be a question from MSF. They are not part of La Coordinadora. They don't receive any funding from us. As you know, they are the purest of the pure, but
They're the best
they
of
are
us.
close partners also.
They are the best of us.
Thank you very much for the reflection. I have a question. I think it's, a bit difficult to answer, but I'm sure you will enlighten us. We are extremely concerned of the trend of the militarized privatization of aid, whereby companies market themselves to donors by emphasizing their efficiency. And they say they can deliver faster, cheaper, and farther. The so-called humanitarians intruders that masquerade as humanitarians fail to adhere to humanitarian principles, like, for example, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that you have mentioned, or, for example, Fogbo in South Sudan, where they deliver food aid dropping in only government-controlled areas with South Sudanese flag. Unfortunately, these are not exceptions. These are increasing. So I would like to know, I would be very much interested to know what do you think about the risks of this trend that is real, is happening, and is increasing? And what do you think we can do to avert or to revert this trend? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carmen. And again, thank you to Médecins Sans Frontières for just being just extraordinary. I always go to visit MSF on every visit. I was just recently in Akobo, and the work that your colleagues are doing there, up in the northeast of South Sudan, Jonglei State, just an incredible courage. 2 weeks after I was there, that hospital then had to close because of direct attacks against your colleagues. Extraordinary work. And now, of course, on the front line in DRC, encountering Ebola too. So huge thanks to you and your brilliant leadership as well. So I think, part of this is winning these battles. And sorry to use a militarized term for, about how we beat militarized alternatives. But, we don't have to shout about this, but we are winning a lot of these battles. And that is in large part because member states are coming behind us, but it's also because we're showing that as a family we deliver in a practical, principled way, and that others can't. And that they're not credible and they're not principled when they try and do things in that different way. Now, I think we have to be open to genuine disruption and innovation. We're not perfect, and we have to keep thinking how we get better. But I don't believe that the militarized model gives us that example. A key conversation I had at almost the highest levels of the White House was after coming out of Gaza earlier this year. And they'd seen a photo of me walking through Gaza City probably in this shirt. And they'd said, but were you wearing your bulletproof kit underneath the shirt? And I said, of course I wasn't. We don't do that when we go out to work with our communities. And they said, but who was providing your security? Was it Hamas? I said, of course it's not Hamas. We wouldn't want Hamas on our convoys. And they said, oh, so you had the Israelis going with you to protect you? And I said, absolutely not. I had one close protection guy that was completely discreet with no weapons showing. And at that moment, I think the realization occurred about what we do with community consent and how it brings difficult negotiations and compromises. We all know what that means in the field when there are armed actors around us and how we maintain our neutrality. But it helped to win the argument that we humanitarians are the way to do this and not the militarized alternatives. I have to say, not heard so much about Fogbo in recent months, but we'll keep an eye on them as well. I'm also quite delighted that in the last 2 or 3 months, I haven't had to talk about, I think you mentioned, I almost forget what they were called, Gaza something. But I don't hear much about them anymore either. Let me just add one more threat to us in this space, not so much militarized, but a threat to the people we serve, which is that I think a lot of the big tech companies are coming in this direction, and they're treating the most vulnerable people on the planet as a data set, as a laboratory to experiment on, as an ego trip or a market. Now, technology will do a huge amount to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and we need that. But we've got to be really careful in managing the data that we collect, that we don't do deals with these big, powerful actors that mean we are sharing a certain amount of data for something that feels like it's free, because it's not free for the people that we serve. That data will be monetized. And that's another area where we've got to hold the line in a principled way as a collective.
Thank you, and thank you for speaking up. I remember your interventions on the Gaza something that you made at the UN. Colleagues, we ran out of time, but Tom is not just Under Secretary General of the United Nations, he's a coordinator. So as coordinator, what should be your marching orders? I don't want to close this event without you conveying a message. What is it? I mean, through the questions you were able to learn a bit about our system. What do you think we should be doing? Please coordinate us. I mean, as a member country, we'll be, keeping you in check and speaking up when we don't like things. And you've heard gender, you heard protection, things that we really care deeply about. But what should we do? for the humanitarian system? What should the people in this audience, not just us, governments, perhaps even the other actors most importantly, what are your concluding remarks?
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, this is one of those, I think Barack Obama described his perception of US foreign policy as leading from behind. And I think the work of the ERC is to definitely try to lead from behind. The second you try to lead from in front, then you get shot down very quickly. And that's as it should be, because this is a kind of noisy, eclectic, wonderful family. And we all do different things in the sector. We all have different strengths. And there are some things that the UN can add particular value on. There are some things where, frankly, we need to get the UN, including me, out of the way. So I see the coordination role as really a sort of gentle convening and just trying to help us move in a common direction, particularly at the moment when we're under such attack. And sometimes, as some of my UN colleagues have described it, they need me to run interference, to have the big public arguments to ensure other people can then get on with delivering on the ground. I suppose if I have three requests, and they're all quite general ones, but one, really keep the dialogue going. So, you know, let's just keep improving things as we go, because this is a period when it could get very chaotic and very contested, and the sector could pull apart. You know, we're seeing that within the NGO movement, between the INGOs and the local NGOs, between UN agencies, between the UN agencies and the NGO. So we've got to keep focused on that core mandate and challenging each other, but sort of disagreeing agreeably, trying to work out, remembering that we're part of the same team. I'd encourage everyone, when we're thinking about the fight back for our values, to think in the way that, as your Prime Minister has done, you know, where are the fights that we should be having? You know, where do we need to be braver? You know, I find this every day in deciding what to tweet about, what to make a statement about. You know, we're making 100 decisions every day on where to dial it up and when to dial it down. And just, if everyone can think about where their organizations or where they as individuals can be even braver at this stage, because every time one person is brave over here, it allows others to be brave in that direction. And again, when people are being brave in the sector, back them up. You know, right now, Tedros is out there being brave in the DRC, so let's all be talking about Tedros's work and the work of Carmen and Médecins Sans Frontières in the DRC. When Miriana is out there talking about defending IHL from the ICRC, let's all get behind her. You know, I think we can do more of that. Whereas often there's a tendency to think, and this is often a comms challenge, you know, unless it's got my acronym on it, then why am I tweeting about it or talking about it in public? And then third and finally, I think if everyone can think, you know, what's the way this week, this month, that we will ensure that we're giving away some of our power in this sector in the direction of local communities? What's the thing we're doing that, if we're really honest, we don't need to be doing anymore, and paying ourselves so much, and I know it doesn't feel like much, but it's much more than our local colleagues are paid to do. And what's the brave thing we could do in that space to ensure we're genuinely giving away that space?
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for gracias. Thank you for coming to Spain. Hopefully you will leave with a positive vibe that you can feel in this room and in this country for your mission, the valuable work, because it's humanity's future that is at stake. So thank you very much for the work you do. Yeah. And please don't be so quiet, and give him a round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.